My name is Camille. It was a quiet Saturday morning, and I was buried in case files trying to wrap up a brief for a child advocacy case when the doorbell rang. At first, I thought it might be a delivery, but when it rang again a few seconds later with more urgency, I stood up, walked over, and opened it without much thought, and that's when I froze. Standing there were two kids, a boy around 9 years old and a little girl who couldn't have been more than 6. Both were dressed in worn clothes and clutching small suitcases. The boy looked me in the eyes and said, "Mom said you're our new home." Now I didn't understand what I was hearing at first. I looked past them, but there was no car. No adult, just them standing there on my doorstep with nervous faces and uncertain eyes taped to the side of one of the bags was a note. A piece of torn paper with familiar, messy handwriting that made my stomach turn before I even read the words. "Camille, don't make this difficult. Be a good sister. I'll be in touch." My heart sank, and I felt the kind of fury that only Savannah could stir in me. I let the kids in, gave them water, and sat them on the couch while I grabbed my phone. I called Savannah once, twice, 12 times before she picked up. Her voice was cheerful and breezy, like she hadn't just abandoned her children on someone else's porch. "You got them, right?" "Great, listen, I'm about to board so I can't talk long," she said. I asked her what in the hell she was doing, and she replied, "I'm doing what I need to do. You're their Aunt Camille, do the right thing," and then she hung up, just like that. I stared at my phone like it had betrayed me. I couldn't believe the audacity she had dropped her children off at my house unannounced with no warning, no preparation, not even a conversation. I looked over at them again. The boy was holding onto a toy truck like it was the only solid thing in his world. The little girl had pulled her sleeves over her hands and was twisting the fabric silently. Their faces were blank, but their eyes gave them away. They were scared and tired and completely unsure about where they were or what would happen next. I felt something crack in my chest, not out of panic or confusion, but something deeper. A memory maybe of all the times I had been left to pick up the pieces when Savannah broke something, whether it was her own life or someone else's. I was no stranger to this dynamic, but this time it was different. This time there were children involved, and they were looking at me like I might be the first stable thing they'd seen in a long time as a lawyer. I knew how this worked legally. This could be considered abandonment. Savannah had left them with no guardianship agreement, no temporary custody paperwork, not even a voicemail, and now she was off to who knows where. From her tone and her boarding comment, I knew she wasn't just going on a weekend getaway. Savannah was escaping the kind of trip you don't come back from quickly, maybe ever, and she had left me to clean it up like always. Except now the stakes were 2 living, breathing kids who needed more than a hot meal and a safe bed. I didn't know what the right move was yet, but I knew I couldn't send them away, and I couldn't pretend this wasn't real. It had already begun, and the rest of my life was about to change because of what happened on that doorstep. I never imagined my life would be the kind where someone could just drop 2 children on my doorstep and expect me to rearrange everything without a second thought. But if I'm being honest, this wasn't the first time Savannah had expected me to clean up her mess. It started years ago when we were kids growing up in a small, sun-scorched neighborhood on the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona. Savannah was always the star of the family, the golden girl, the one with the wide green eyes and long blonde curls that our mother adored and styled like she was entering pageants even when she was only 6. I, on the other hand, had thick black hair, quieter eyes, and an even quieter voice, and for as long as I can remember, I was the one who blended into the background our dad left when I was 10. Just packed a bag and disappeared in the middle of the night. No note, no explanation, just gone. And from that moment on, our mother held on to Savannah even tighter, praising her for every little thing and criticizing me for anything she could find. If I got an A, she asked why it wasn't an A+, if Savannah got a C. She said at least she tried that difference in treatment, shaped everything Savannah was allowed to explore to break rules to date, whoever she wanted, and come home whenever she felt like it. I wasn't even allowed to sleep over at friends' houses without a full interrogation. By the time we were both in high school, Savannah had already developed a reputation. She was wild, unpredictable, and oddly charming. In that chaotic way some people are when they know they'll always be forgiven. I, on the other hand, had one goal: to get out. I studied harder than anyone else in my class, worked 2 part-time jobs, and earned a full scholarship to Arizona State, where I double majored in pre-law and child development. I figured if I couldn't fix my family, at least I could help other kids escape the kind of emotional neglect I had grown up with. Savannah never went to college. She got pregnant at 19, moved in with a guy she barely knew, and then showed up back at our mother's house 8 months later with a newborn and no explanation. I was home on break when it happened, and I remember standing in the kitchen while our mother ordered me to help her feed the baby. She said, "Savannah needs rest. She's been through a lot." As if I hadn't been the one working 40 hours a week and taking 15 credits a semester. I ended up spending most of that summer watching my niece changing diapers and mixing formula while Savannah slept until noon and went out with friends every night. That was the first time I realized our mother didn't just favor Savannah, she expected me to act like I owed her something for simply existing, and for years I tried to rationalize it. I told myself it was just stress or old-fashioned thinking, but by the time I graduated law school, passed the bar, and started working as a legal advocate for abused and neglected children, I knew better. I knew that some people never stop enabling toxic behavior because it serves their need for control or comfort, or just keeps the family dysfunction intact. I moved out as soon as I got my first real job, rented a small townhouse close to downtown Phoenix, and started building a life that finally felt like it belonged to me. I didn't keep in touch with Savannah much, just the occasional text or obligatory holiday photo. I knew she had 2 kids now, that she still bounced between jobs and boyfriends, that she never seemed to stay still long enough for anyone to hold her accountable. But what I didn't know was how close I still was to being dragged back into her orbit. I thought I had escaped that part of my life, that I had built enough distance and enough stability to protect myself. But when those 2 kids showed up at my door, I realized I hadn't escaped anything. I had just been waiting for the next time she needed me. There are things you carry from childhood that never quite leave you, no matter how far you move or how much you achieve. They sit beneath the surface like sediment, waiting for just the right moment to rise again. For me, those moments started flooding back the night after the kids arrived. I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room with a blanket around my shoulders, watching them breathe as they lay curled up on my couch, and all I could think about was the summer I turned 16. That was the year Savannah accused me of stealing our mother's emergency cash, $200 gone from a tin in the laundry room, and before I could even process what she was saying, she was crying. Telling our mother she saw me take it, that I had planned it for weeks. I hadn't. I didn't even know the money existed, but Savannah cried with such conviction that it didn't matter. Our mother didn't even ask for my side of the story. She slapped me hard across the cheek, told me I was grounded indefinitely, and threatened to call the police if I ever embarrassed her again. I remember sitting on the floor of my bedroom that night, staring at the red imprint of her hand on my face. Not because it hurt, but because it was the first time I knew without a doubt that the truth didn't matter in our family. What mattered was the version of events that made Savannah look like the victim and me like the problem. There were dozens of moments like that, small betrayals stacked on bigger ones, like when Savannah borrowed my clothes without asking and then laughed when she spilled wine on them, or the time she told her friends I was adopted because she didn't want them to know we were sisters, or the worst one when she got pregnant at 19 and our mother told me I had to delay my sophomore year to stay home and help. I remember the look of disbelief on my academic advisor's face when I told him I was taking a leave of absence for family obligations. I didn't explain, how could I? I was taking care of a newborn that wasn't mine while my sister disappeared most nights, and our mother called me selfish whenever I brought up returning to school. Eventually, I did go back a semester late and exhausted, but more determined than ever to never rely on anyone in my family again. I built my life like a fortress. Every brick laid with purpose, every boundary set in stone. So when Savannah called years later asking for a loan, I said no. When she messaged about crashing at my place after another breakup, I ignored it. I thought I was drawing healthy lines, protecting myself from more damage. But what I didn't realize until that night on the couch was that the fortress I built didn't just keep her out. It also kept me walled in, emotionally detached, and unwilling to trust, even with people who hadn't hurt me. Even in relationships where I wasn't in danger. I saw myself in those kids, especially the boy, the way he avoided eye contact, how he always waited a second before speaking like he was calculating the safest answer, and I remembered how I used to do the same, how I used to make myself small in rooms where I wasn't wanted, how I used to hope that being quiet and good would be enough to earn peace. It rarely was. I didn't know how much of my life I had spent just surviving until I saw it reflected in a child I barely knew, but somehow understood completely, and that realization broke something open in me, something that wasn't rage or guilt or even grief. It was a kind of clarity I couldn't undo what had happened to me growing up, but maybe I could make sure it didn't happen to them, and maybe, just maybe, that could be enough. The next morning, I woke up early, long before the kids stirred. I hadn't really slept, but I was too restless to stay in bed. I needed answers. Savannah hadn't called back since the brief conversation at the airport, and she hadn't texted. I checked social media out of habit, not expecting anything, but then I saw one of her tagged photos on someone else's Instagram story. It had only been up for an hour. There. She was in Paris, standing in front of the Seine, wearing a designer trench coat, champagne in hand. The caption read, "Vacation mode with this queen," and the man who posted it looked like he was at least 25 years older than her, salt and pepper hair, expensive watch, smug smile. I tapped through the rest of his stories, and there were more pictures, a penthouse suite, a rooftop dinner, a private car. Savannah smiling in every frame, like she didn't have a care in the world. I stared at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. She hadn't gone on a retreat or a work trip. She was being flown around Europe by a sugar daddy while her children slept under blankets. I had bought them the night before. I stood up and walked into the living room. The kids were still asleep, curled together like puppies, and I felt this growing pressure in my chest. It wasn't just anger. It was something deeper, a sense of being used again. Like every choice I made to stay away from Savannah meant nothing because she could always just toss her kids into my life and vanish, and no one would stop her. I spent the morning trying to track down anything I could. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I needed proof. I dug through old emails and found one where she had forwarded me her passport scan years ago for some legal document she needed notarized. I cross-checked the name with a travel verification site and confirmed it. She had flown out from JFK 3 days ago on a first-class ticket to Paris, return trip not listed. I took a deep breath and closed my laptop. Then, I turned to the immediate reality. The kids, they needed food, they needed clothes, they needed something better than me. Pacing around my house like a storm cloud. I asked the boy, his name was Leo, if they had any more clothes packed. He shrugged and said, "Just these," and pointed to their tiny bags. I opened them and found a couple of wrinkled shirts, socks with holes underwear that looked like it barely fit. I realized that Savannah hadn't even packed properly for them, like she hadn't expected them to stay long, or maybe she hadn't cared. I offered to take them shopping, and they lit up like it was Christmas. We went to a department store, and I told them to pick what they liked, not what they thought they were supposed to pick. Leo chose a pair of blue sneakers and held them like treasure. The little girl, her name was June, found a soft yellow hoodie with bunnies on it and clutched it to her chest. I bought them pajamas, toothbrushes, new backpacks, school supplies just in case, snack stuffed animals, everything I could think of to make this feel less like a temporary fix and more like a new beginning. When we got back to the car, Leo asked if we could listen to music. I handed him my phone and let him pick. He chose a playlist of movie soundtracks, and they both sang softly in the back seat. I felt something shift inside me, not just responsibility, but connection. I wasn't doing this because I had to. I was doing this because no one else had ever done it for me, and now I could do it for them. When we got home, they helped me unpack the bags without being asked. Leo thanked me 3 separate times, and June hugged my leg for no reason while I was cooking dinner that night after they went to sleep. I sat in my room and cried. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I hadn't realized how much I wanted to be needed until someone actually needed me for something good, for something that mattered. And deep down, I knew I couldn't give them back, not to Savannah, not to that chaos, not after this. The next few days passed slowly but gently, like the world had paused just enough for us to catch our breath. I tried to stick to a routine breakfast at 8, screen time after chores, some reading in the afternoon. It wasn't perfect, but the kids responded better than I expected. Leo loved puzzles, the more complex the better. June was obsessed with crayons and would spend hours drawing animals and taping them to my fridge. It amazed me how quickly they adapted, how fast they began to treat my house like their home. But it also broke my heart a little because I knew what that meant. They had never had real stability before, the kind that didn't vanish overnight, or depend on someone else's mood one afternoon. I came home from work to find Leo on the living room floor, building a Lego set I had picked up on a whim. June ran to me holding a piece of paper she had drawn, the three of us standing in front of a big house. Her handwriting underneath said, "My new family." I didn't know what to say, so I just hugged her and kissed the top of her head. After dinner, I tucked them into bed and sat on the floor outside their room for a long time. I was afraid to go to sleep because I kept thinking about what Savannah would do if she came back. Would she just show up and demand them? Would she twist everything around like she always had? I had no legal authority to keep them. Not yet, but I also couldn't bear the thought of them returning to someone who saw them as baggage, not people. Leo started asking questions at night. Quiet ones like, "Why didn't Mom tell you we were coming?" Or "Why doesn't she call?" I didn't lie. I just said I didn't know, but I was here now and that wasn't going to change. One night, he looked at me and said, "You're nicer than her," and then he rolled over and fell asleep. June clung to me more and more. She had this little rabbit toy she kept with her constantly. One morning, she couldn't find it and she panicked. Crying so hard, she gave herself hiccups. I searched everywhere, and when I couldn't find it, I drove back to the store and bought a new one. It wasn't the same. She knew that. But when I gave it to her and told her I would help her name it, she softened. We called it Clover, and from that day on, Clover went with us everywhere. Grocery store, library, even the gas station. I started taking them to the park on weekends, letting them run until they were breathless. I taught them how to make simple snacks. We baked cookies and burned the first batch. We laughed and tried again. It was the most normal I had felt in years. I hadn't expected to bond with them so fast. I thought it would take weeks or even months. But it was like they were waiting for someone to let them be kids, and I was waiting for someone to let me be soft one evening. I found myself lying on the couch while June brushed my hair, and Leo read a joke book out loud. They were giggling and interrupting each other, and I just let it happen. No phone, no noise. Just this quiet, happy chaos that made the house feel full when I went to bed that night. I knew it with certainty they weren't visitors anymore. They were mine. Maybe not legally, but emotionally, and I would fight for them if I had to, whatever it took. It didn't take long for Savannah to make her next move. She finally called again on a Wednesday night. I had just finished folding laundry when my phone rang and her name lit up the screen like a warning. I let it ring twice before I picked up, not because I wanted to talk, but because I needed to hear what she would say. "Camille," she said, dragging out my name like it was a joke. "Hope the kids aren't giving you too much trouble." I kept my voice calm and asked where she was. She laughed somewhere nicer than Phoenix. "Let's leave it at that." I told her she needed to come back, that this wasn't a game. She scoffed and said, "It's a vacation, Camille, not a disappearance." "Don't be dramatic," I reminded her. She hadn't left any documents or guardianship papers. She cut me off. "If you call CPS, I'll call your job and tell them you're off your meds again, that you're unstable and dangerous around children." She said it smoothly, like she had practiced the line. I sat in silence for a moment, letting her threat settle, then hung up. I sat there for a long time, phone still in my hand. The quiet in my apartment suddenly felt suffocating. I didn't take medication. Never had. There was nothing unstable about me, but the fact that Savannah could weaponize a lie like that meant she was willing to go as far as she needed to keep control. And that meant I had to act carefully the next day. I met with Ethan, my boyfriend. He worked in IT for a cybersecurity firm and had seen enough corporate deception to know how these things played out. I told him everything, showed him the messages. The call log explained the history. He listened quiet but focused, and when I finished, he said, "We're going to document everything. You're going to protect yourself, and we're going to end this." We started by backing up all communication with Savannah. He helped me record our next phone call using a secure app. I baited her into repeating the threat, and she did word for word. I even got her to admit she had no idea when she was coming back, and that she didn't care who had the kids, as long as she didn't have to deal with them. Ethan cleaned up the audio, added timestamps, and filed it on a drive only we could access. I also gathered photos of the kids' condition when they arrived, the lack of proper clothes, the poor hygiene, June's underweight frame, Leo's untreated dental issue. I documented everything with dates, labels, and summaries. I wrote a personal affidavit detailing Savannah's past neglect and her history of manipulation. I even pulled up old family emails where she had demanded money or threatened to disappear with the kids. Then I contacted a friend of mine from law school. She worked in child welfare litigation, and I trusted her completely. She helped me draft a report for CPS attaching the audio file, my affidavit, and the supporting evidence. I submitted it anonymously at first just to ensure it went on record, and then prepared myself for what came next. Emotionally, I was already in deep. I was waking up early to make breakfast, checking school district enrollment requirements, helping Leo with his reading fluency, June with her fear of loud voices. But legally, I still had no standing, and I knew Savannah could come back at any moment and rip them away. I couldn't let that happen. I started exploring options for emergency guardianship. My friend explained the process, said it would be faster if Savannah stayed out of state, especially if we could prove she had willfully abandoned the children, and with the recording we had. She believed we had a solid case. I felt like I was finally gaining some ground, like I wasn't just reacting anymore, but moving strategically for the first time in years. I wasn't just enduring Savannah's chaos. I was dismantling it brick by brick with facts, with law, with clarity. And under all that anger and fatigue, I felt something new starting to grow, not just resolve, but purpose. I wasn't just fighting to protect myself anymore. I was building something worth keeping, and no one, especially not Savannah, was going to take that from me without a fight. The confrontation didn't happen how I imagined it. It wasn't a phone call or a court summons. It was a pounding on my door at 8 in the morning. Loud, heavy, impatient, I knew instantly it wasn't the mail or a neighbor. It was too aggressive. I told the kids to stay in their room, then walked to the door and peeked through the peephole. My stomach dropped. Savannah was outside with two men I didn't recognize, both large, both standing too close. One of them looked like he was Eastern European, tall with a shaved head and a face that didn't flinch. Savannah had a phone in her hand and sunglasses perched on her forehead like she was still on vacation. She banged on the door again, yelling, "Camille, open the damn door. We need to talk." I didn't respond. I backed away and grabbed my phone to call the police. But before I could hit dial, I heard a loud crack. They had kicked the door once, twice on the third. Hit it splintered and flew open. I screamed and ran to stand between them and the hallway. Savannah stormed in like she owned the place, the two men following behind her like bodyguards. She yelled, "Where are my kids?" I said nothing, just held up my phone and told her the police were on their way. She laughed and told one of the men to get the kids. I stepped forward, blocking his path. He didn't speak, just shoved me with one hand. The impact sent me backwards into the wall. My shoulder hit a framed picture that crashed to the floor. The noise brought Leo and June out, both of them wide-eyed and frozen. Leo shouted, "Aunt Camille," and tried to run to me, but Savannah grabbed him. June screamed and tried to pull away from the man who reached for her. I pushed myself off the wall, head spinning, and screamed at them to stop. Savannah yelled something in another language to one of the men, and he scooped June up like a doll. I reached out, grabbing at his arm, and he threw me to the floor again. This time my head hit the edge of the coffee table and everything went blurry. I heard June crying, Leo shouting, and then the sound of the front door slamming shut. When I came to the house was silent. The door was wide open. I stumbled outside just in time to see a black SUV speeding away down the street. I tried to memorize the license plate, but my vision was still foggy. I called 911 and gave them everything I had. I told them my name, my profession, what had just happened, that the children had been forcibly taken by a woman with no custody papers, and two unknown men. I gave them the direction the SUV had gone, and the best description I could manage. The dispatcher stayed on the line with me until officers arrived. They took photos of my injuries, my broken door, the mess inside the house. I gave a full statement and insisted this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a kidnapping. I showed them the CPS report, the affidavit, the audio recording of Savannah's earlier threat. I gave them the man's photo from her social media. The one she had been vacationing with the officers took it seriously. They put out an alert and promised they'd coordinate with CPS since the case was already open after they left. I sat on the floor of my ruined living room, heart pounding, ears ringing, my hands still shaking. I thought I had been prepared for her return. I thought I had covered every angle, but nothing could have prepared me for Savannah showing up with muscle and ripping two innocent children out of the only stable home they'd ever had. I didn't know what came next, but I knew one thing: this wasn't over. The day after Savannah stormed into my home and took the kids by force, I walked into the police station, bruised, bandaged, and holding a folder full of documentation. The moment I sat down with the same officer who had taken my initial report, I could see his demeanor shift. This wasn't just another family squabble, it was serious. I handed him the backup of the recorded phone call where Savannah threatened to sabotage my job. I gave him photos of my injuries, a list of the children's belongings left behind, and the name and probable identity of the man she brought with her, a known associate of her so-called vacation partner. The officer nodded, made notes, and told me they had located the SUV through traffic cameras about an hour after the incident. It was pulled over in a suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of Scottsdale. The two men were arrested on the spot. Savannah tried to flee on foot with the kids but didn't get far. She had locked June in the car when officers surrounded her, and Leo had been screaming for help through the back window. Both children were removed immediately and placed under temporary CPS protection while the case moved forward. I felt relief wash over me like water after a long drought, but it was tangled with dread because I knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a battle. I never wanted, but could no longer avoid. CPS contacted me that afternoon. A different caseworker than the one I had first spoken to, colder, more clinical. She told me I would not be able to speak to the children yet. That due process was in motion, and the agency had to determine next steps based on legal standing. I asked if they understood the danger the children had been in. She responded that all relevant incidents would be factored into their placement decisions. But until the case was formally resolved, they were under state care. I hung up, feeling powerless. I had all the proof in the world, all the bruises, documents, and digital files, but bureaucracy was slower than violence, and Savannah had once again disrupted everything faster than the system could respond. I shifted gears, called my lawyer friend, and filed a formal motion for emergency custody, citing Savannah's physical aggression, her abandonment, and the unstable conditions the children had endured. I submitted notarized character statements from coworkers, neighbors, even my landlord people who had witnessed the children in my care and seen the sudden disappearance. My friend expedited the hearing set for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, I kept working, preparing, building the strongest case possible. Ethan stayed by my side through every minute of it, helping with documents, organizing timelines, handling security footage backups. He even got me access to a court-verified therapist who evaluated me and wrote a letter attesting to my emotional fitness and capacity to provide care. When the day of the hearing arrived, I walked into the courtroom wearing a navy suit and holding every paper I had touched in the last month. Savannah sat across the aisle wearing a white blazer that did nothing to mask the fury in her face. She had managed to find a public defender, someone who seemed unsure about the full depth of her chaos. I watched as she squirmed when the judge reviewed the assault report. Her travel records, the emergency call transcripts, and the audio recordings. The judge didn't hide his concern, and when he looked at me, he asked a single question. "Are you willing to take full responsibility for the children if custody is granted today?" I answered yes without hesitation. I would give them stability, safety, a home where they could just be kids. The judge nodded and turned back to Savannah, who had gone pale. She mumbled something about stress and misunderstanding, but it was too late. The damage was done. The judge granted me temporary custody pending a full investigation, but Savannah was barred from any contact until a psychological evaluation was completed and approved by the court. As I left the building, I felt like I could finally breathe again. The case wasn't over, but the momentum had shifted. I had turned the tide not just for Leo and June, but for myself, and I wasn't stopping until they were safe for good. It took another 6 months of hearings, home visits, psychological evaluations, and back-and-forth court proceedings before the final decision came down. By then, the children were fully integrated into my life. They had their own bedrooms in the house I moved into just outside Phoenix, a small single-story place with a backyard lemon trees in the corner and space for them to run. They had routines, favorite teachers, after-school activities, and a bedtime ritual that included hot chocolate. A song June always requested and Leo insisting on 1 extra minute of reading every night. They called me Aunt C now, and sometimes when June was half asleep, she'd call me Mommy by accident. Each time it broke something open in me that I never knew I had closed off. I never corrected her, never made her feel awkward. I just held her a little closer until she drifted off. The last court hearing was short but tense. Savannah was there, wearing a stiff blazer and acting composed, but I could tell she was unraveling beneath it. The judge reviewed the case. Summary recapped the months of neglect, the unannounced drop-off, the physical assault, the failed psychological evaluation, and the total lack of sustained effort on her part to regain custody. He then turned to me and read the final judgment: full legal guardianship awarded to Camille Foster. I didn't cry. Not in front of Savannah, but the moment I stepped out of that courtroom, I exhaled in a way I hadn't since the day those kids first appeared at my door. I drove straight to their school and waited until the final bell rang. When they ran toward me, I knelt down and hugged them both tighter than I ever had before. Leo asked if everything was okay, and I told him. Yes, I told him they were home for good. June smiled the way she always did when she felt safe. Later that night, we had a small celebration, just the three of us, pizza ice cream, a movie marathon. They stayed up past bedtime and I didn't stop them because some nights are meant for joy. No rules, just love as the credits rolled, and they finally dozed off on the couch. I sat there watching them breathe and thought about everything that had led us here. I thought about the years I had spent feeling like I didn't matter in my own family, about the silence I carried, the resentment. I buried the belief that no matter what I did, I would never be seen as good enough. And then I looked at those two children who now called my house home and realized something had changed, not just in them, but in me. I had stepped up when no one else would. I had created a space they could grow in, not just survive, and in doing that, I had healed a part of myself I didn't know was still broken. Savannah tried to reach out a few months after the decision. She left a voicemail saying she wanted to reconnect to rebuild some kind of relationship with the kids. I listened to the message once, then deleted it. I had no intention of letting her back in, not because I was angry, although part of me still was, but because I had seen what peace looked like, and I wasn't going to let her chaos anywhere near it. My mother never called, not after the incident, not after the court case, not even to ask if I was okay, and in a way, that was a blessing too, because it confirmed everything I already knew. That love in our family had always been conditional, transactional. And now I had the chance to raise these kids in a different kind of love, one that didn't keep score, didn't manipulate, didn't vanish when things got hard one morning. Months later, Leo came into the kitchen holding a photo I had taken of him in June at the park. He pointed at it and said, "I want this to be our family picture on the wall." I asked him if he was sure, and he nodded. "Yeah, this one's real." I framed it that afternoon, hung it above the dining table. And every night when we sit down to eat, it's the first thing I see, a reminder that family isn't always who you're born with. Sometimes it's who you fight for, who you protect, who you choose. And in that choice, I found the kind of strength I never knew I had and the kind of love I never thought I'd deserve.